Hello there, and welcome to today's webcast. Multnomah County, Oregon works smarter with new HR and financial systems. I'm Justin Marlowe. I'm a professor of public policy at the University of Washington and also a senior fellow with the Governing Institute. And I'm happy to serve as today's host for the webcast. Thanks for joining us. We're going to have a great session over the next hour. Before we dive into the content, I wanted to share a few brief housekeeping notes. We will email a recording of this presentation to all registrants within 48 hours. Please use the recording for your reference, or feel free to pass along to colleagues. We've designed this webcast to be interactive, and you can participate in questions and answers with us by submitting your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom left of the presentation panel. Send in your question as they come up throughout the presentation, and we'll address as many of them as possible during the Q&A portion. For those of you interested in downloading a copy of the slides, you can do so by clicking the Webinar Resources widget at the bottom of the console. Also, during today's webcast, you'll be able to connect with your peers via LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. For those of you on Twitter, please use hashtag #GovLive, that's hashtag GOVLIVE, to share key takeaways, quotes, and learnings from today's webcast. At the close of the webcast, we'll encourage you to complete a brief survey about the presentation. We'd like to hear what you think. If you're unable to stay with us for the entire webcast but would like to complete the survey, please click the survey widget at the bottom of the screen to launch the survey. Otherwise, it will automatically pop up as soon as the webcast concludes. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. And if you're experiencing any media player issues or have any other technical problems, please visit our webcast help guide by clicking on the Help button at the bottom of the console. Joining me today to discuss this topic are Jacob Farkas, Project Manager with Multnomah County, Oregon, and Sherry Amos, Director of Market Development for Education and Government at Workday. Let me tell you a bit more about them. Jacob is an information technology project manager with a knack for checklists and time commitments. Collaborator by nature that looks to help teams communicate, perform, and drive toward a common goal. He's also an average pancake maker and a proud father. Sherry Amos is Managing Director of Industry Strategy for Education and Government at Workday. Sherry brings over 20 years of experience to her role leading industry strategy for the education and government industries at Workday. She's responsible for working with customers, partners, and industry influencers to bring high-value, next-generation cloud solutions to market. Prior to joining Workday, Sherry led industry strategy teams for SAP for all regulated industries, including state and local government, education, federal government, utilities, and healthcare. Sherry also previously held executive positions with Oracle and PeopleSoft in strategy, product management, and marketing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sherry Amos to begin the first part of our presentation.
Thank you, Justin. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
All right, great. Thank you all for joining us today. I just want to give a bit of an introduction, just a few short minutes of Workday prior to turning the session over to Jacob, who's going to share the case study for Multnomah County. And along with that, I just want to share a little bit about our philosophy, what sits behind the design of our solutions, talk a little bit about the benefits our customers see once they deploy Workday, give you a bit of an overview of our portfolio of solutions and who some of our customers are, and then we will get right to Jacob's program. So at Workday, we call a lot of the underlying capability that powers each of our solutions the power of one. And this applies to many things. It applies, first of all, to the fact that when you are a Workday customer, you're a member of one community. And what that means is every customer at Workday is always on the same current version of Workday. You're never on an older system. And so that's really beneficial to customers because it means that you can share things with each other, which has long been a request of government and both government and higher education. If we develop a report, why can't we share it with another customer? You can do that today in Workday. It also means that there's one source of all of your real-time data, whether it sits in HR, payroll, financial management, grants. Across the whole suite of solutions, there is only one source of your data. It is always trustworthy. It's always real-time. There's also only one experience within any Workday solution, and that means one user experience, one design experience. And so if you can execute a transaction, for instance, in HR, you can also execute a transaction in AP. And then finally, key to any cloud solution is the security model. And within Workday, that too is just one security model. You don't have a separate model for HR, a separate one for payroll, a separate one for finance. So keep those underlying principles in mind as you think about or see Workday. Now, in addition, a little unique about Workday and the solutions we've designed, they were all designed from the ground up for cloud delivery using modern technology architecture. Things like embedded mobile, you don't have to add additional capabilities to have mobile transactions on your iPhone or your iPad or any other mobile device. It's deployed, as I mentioned before, one single version, all customers. So all customers get advantage of any innovation that occurs at the same time. One service level agreement for all customers with 99.7% uptime. And one thing that tends to be quite important in government is always-on audit tracking. Every single transaction, no matter where it originates, always has audit on, accountability, you know, who entered the transaction, who changed it. It's always traceable from start to finish. And so, again, a few differentiators our customers like to understand about the underlying capabilities of the solutions, which is what I will share with you now. So Workday has a full suite of what has typically been referred to in the market as ERP solutions, or Enterprise Resource Planning. And in this suite, we have all the capabilities of core financial management, which you see here, things like general ledger, contracting to cash, procurement to pay, expenses to reimbursement, and then we also have a full suite of grants management for government as well, which includes those specific grants and project level capabilities for managing grant funding. Also, in addition to the financial solutions, we have a full suite of solutions for human capital management, for all of the business processes and functions of HR as well as payroll. So plan to hire, for instance, development, performance review, compensation planning, all of those capabilities, as well as payroll capabilities. And all of these solutions, whether it's finance, HR, payroll, are highly configurable to your specific business processes and your specific workflows and how you want transactions to flow, how you want them to get approved, all those kind of things. And also a little addition on the Workday Human Capital Management side, if you happen to be with a public university or public university system, then we also have a full set of capability that deals with academic type employees, so faculty, things like tenure tracking, academic compensation and leave tracking, those kind of things. So what I would ask you to keep in mind just from our little introduction today is the underlying sophistication of the technology powers a lot of highly configurable capability within any of these solutions, regardless of which one you may choose to use. And it also brings all of those power of one capabilities to any one of these business processes or any one of these solutions that you may choose to use. And then finally, before I turn it over to Jacob, I just wanted to give you an idea of who some of our other government customers are. We have customers that range from state governments to large cities and counties, as well as federal research labs. We have departments of transportation. So we likely have another customer running Workday that is similar to you. And then the large yellow number in the middle, we're very, very focused on customer satisfaction. And each year we execute an independent survey with our customers for our customer satisfaction rate, and we're very proud to say it's 98%. So we try very hard to keep our customers happy and to ensure that your success with Workday projects and solutions are also our success. So this slide shows you some of our government-specific customers. And then also, I mentioned public universities. If you are affiliated with one of those, we have quite a number of large public institutions as well, including state systems of higher education, like the Nevada State System of Higher Education, very large public universities like the University of Texas, Louisiana State University, etc. So whether you are a smaller organization, small county, a state government, a large city government, a university, we have customers that are already Workday customers that can help you understand more about Workday. So with that, I hope that was a helpful introduction. And Jacob, I would like to turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much, Sherry. I appreciate it. And I wanted to thank Governing for the opportunity to share the Multnomah County ERP journey here. As noted, my name is Jacob Farkas. I'm a project manager here in the Information Technology Division at Multnomah County. And today we are going to be talking about these items. One, just some background information, and that's about our organization as a whole, and then also how we got to our ERP implementation. I was going to go over our ERP ecosystem and the overall methodology of how we got to that ecosystem, and ultimately with a program structure and timeline of getting there. Some updates on what's happening now that we've been live for about 7 months. Some of the lessons that we learned along the way during the implementation process. And then I think we wrap up with some Q&A for Justin, Sherry, and myself. So just to provide a little bit of background on Multnomah County, it was created in December of 1984. In terms of actual footprint, it's the smallest county within the state of Oregon, yet it is the most populous county. In terms of organizational structure, we have 8 elected officials, 10 departments, over 6,000 employees, and 12 labor unions. And then to dig into that a little bit more, we operate 32 health and dental clinics across the county. Our library operates 19 branches. Within our Department of Community Services, we do animal services, elections, land use planning, roads, and we maintain 26 bridges all across the county. If people need food handlers cards, they come through Multnomah County, restaurant inspections. These are just some examples of some of the services that we provide. And in several cases, we have 24/7 operations, largely within our public safety division. So as you can tell, our organization is quite complex. Now I just want to provide a little bit of background about how we got to our ERP implementation. And this is really some of those high-level milestones that ultimately led us to where we are today. So back in 1999, we went live with SAP as a response to Y2K, which I'm sure lots of you remember. And now there's a big gap of 15 years between 99 and 2014 in terms of the next milestone there. And during that time, we kept up with our SAP upgrades, but we really only added one module, the supplier relationship management module, but otherwise just kept SAP running. And in April of 2014, we kicked off an ERP analysis project by partnering with Gartner. And that analysis project was really to determine what the needs were of our organization. As noted, 15 years had passed. We hadn't done any sort of like life cycle analysis within our ERP space. So we wanted to make sure that we were meeting the needs of our organization and what was needed from our ERP. So in March of 2015, that analysis was complete. And throughout that project, we were able to identify these 57 gaps and were able to rate them whether they were low or high in the areas in which they fit. And it was all across our different operational spaces of HR and finance and procure to pay or source to settle, and then our asset management, enterprise asset management group. A couple of things that are noted here that bubbled up to the top for everybody was the request for a better mobile environment and better reporting. So those were identified as two of the real biggies. Ultimately, from that analysis project, our leadership decided to move forward with an ERP request for proposal, which was out in November of 2015. Ultimately, the RFP was awarded in June of 2016. Spent some time doing contracting, and then ultimately in March of 2017, our system integrator was on site, and that is when the pre-work phase began for our ultimate ERP implementation. And I'll have you remember that date because we're going to look at another timeline in a few slides. So just to note with the RFP, one of the things that we did that was somewhat unique was try to accomplish two goals within one RFP. We wanted to select the best ERP software that met the needs of our organization, and that was taking into consideration everything we learned through that analysis project. And then concurrently, find the right system integrator for us to help us implement that software package. And this slide shows somewhat of a diagram of how we did that, and I'll do my best to talk through this without being able to point, because that's usually what helps the most. But our single RFP held a space for both a system integrator path and a software path. And I'm going to follow the software path first. So we asked for written proposals, and through our scoring, either qualified or down selected, and then qualified sets of software, understanding that it may not be one piece of software that's going to meet the needs for all of the pieces of our ERP. And once we were able to qualify those through the written proposal, we essentially set that aside, knowing that we had these various sets of software that we wanted to move forward with. And then through our system integrator side, now on the left side, also submitting a written proposal. In the scoring that happened within that space, they were either down selected or qualified to move on to the next round. And any software organization could submit to the RFP. If a system integrator was submitting to the RFP, they had to bring at least a single piece of software with them. So what we're ultimately hoping to get was as many possible options as we got through that first couple of rounds of qualification. And then once we identified our set of tools that we wanted to move forward with, we provided that to the system integrators that had qualified past that first round. So even if they may have proposed something different, we identified these solution sets and asked the system integrators to then move forward with how they would implement those for us. That resulted in a second written response, going through a qualification step, then some oral demonstration of both the software and specific questions for the system integrators. We had in there a spot for a best and final offer, and then ultimately at the end selecting our system integrator and our tool suite. And for us, and through this RFP, the system integrator selected was Deloitte Consulting, and the software suite included Workday as our really core ERP, and then 3 integrated systems to make up the whole ecosystem, which are IBM Tririga, Jagger for our procurement and contracting, and Questica for our budgeting. So now we had an idea of how we were moving forward, and started to put together and formulate that. And it was time to start communicating out to county staff what we were trying to do here. And probably for the folks on the phone, you know that ERP is really complex and it can be overwhelming. And we wanted to do our best to try to relate it to something understandable. So in some of our early communications, we wanted to have something comparable, like you see in front of you, is the technology piece, right? So here we've got the 1999 Nokia on the right, which most people probably had, and what was, the latest iPhone at the time. And hopefully this was able to just provide some people with a bit of context of how we're moving into the future and making it relatable to people nowadays so that they could understand what this journey was going to look like for us. So I talked about the project we did with Gartner in terms of our analysis effort. And when we were engaging with them at that time, they had introduced this concept of a postmodern ERP. And this might look familiar to several of you. And what we found is it very similarly met where we were, right? So that timeline right there in the middle of a modern ERP almost matches exactly the time frame that we had for our milestones, where we had integrated an ERP suite that, through a single vendor with SAP that covered all of these components. And in learning about the postmodern ERP approach, that really appealed to our leadership. And especially by the time we had gotten to this point, from a IT perspective, we took a cloud-first approach when looking at software options. So this diagram and what Gartner described as a postmodern ERP really appealed to the way that we wanted to move forward in our operations this way. And this is what our existing postmodern ERP looks like. Again, taking a cloud-first approach, you can see that largely we see lots of clouds on the page here. Workday performing as our core ERP or that functionality across many of our operations. Basically, the whole financial suite and the whole HCM suite, including learning, which we added on. We have IBM Tririga performing the business operations for space management, facilities asset management, and work order management. Jagger is our procure-to-pay system, doing our e-procurement, sourcing, supplier management, and contract management. And Questica is our budgeting application. Now, Questica and the one e-procurement piece of Jagger were two existing applications that we have maintained throughout the implementation of our ERP process. But the full suite of Workday, the full IBM piece, and then the other three Jagger components were all implemented as part of our ERP implementation. And while the lines in between them indicate some integration points, of course, there's not just one single integration between these components. We actually have 60 integrations between internal and external systems coming through Workday. And at the very bottom here, the little graphic just trying to indicate what's available from a mobile perspective. And this is really trying to hit on one of those functionality gaps that was identified, that our user base was looking for more things that they could do in the mobile space. So in order to achieve that ecosystem that we have now, at the onset of our implementation project, these program principles were adopted. And these were solidified with county stakeholders and discussed. And they provided a great resource to come back to as we went through the implementation project. If we ever got stuck or needed some help in decision making, it was a really great thing to go back, understanding that at one point we'd all agreed that these are the principles that we wanted to move forward with, and were the decisions that we were making in line with these principles. And a few of them to call out, specifically the one county. As I said at the beginning, we're a somewhat complex organization with lots of different lines of business, and one of the goals that we were hoping to achieve was to simplify and have some consistency in the processes that we have So we try to focus a lot on that and trying to work together to take a really unified approach as we move forward. ERP platform first. This was really to help us always refer back to this suite of software as a way to solve our needs rather than to go out and buy something new. The configuration replacing customization. Sherry talked about the Power of One at the beginning and that one line of code that Workday provides. So we are able to configure Workday, but we're not customizing anything. We're not doing anything different than the other organizations out there that are using Workday, which is great for a number of reasons. One of them being that we can connect with other organizations and ask how they're doing something. And if it's in line with what we're trying to do, we have the ability to implement that. And then, of course, the thoughtfulness around impact. This was a monumental shift in business operations for us as an organization. So we wanted to move through this and be thoughtful about how businesses were being impacted, how employees were being impacted, and making sure that we're moving forward in the right direction. So as I noted, Deloitte was the system integrator that was chosen to help us implement our ERP systems. And what they come to the table with is a playbook, and they outline the phases that we're going to go through. They have developed a number of materials to get us kicked off and get started. And as it's noted there, it's been developed with Workday, so it's in line with the way that Workday would like to have things implemented. And this was a really good approach for us, and it helped us really get started. It just required the Multnomah County stamp on it, right? So there were several pre-configured business processes, as it notes there, and we just needed to come up with the components that were necessary for Multnomah County to do business. And the influence and the direction needed to ensure that the system worked for us and met the needs of our organization. And then there are things like testing templates. And again, there's a great place to start. And then we would modify depending on what other additional testing was needed, what other user groups need to go through this to ensure that we're hitting on all the right things. There we have our Multnomah County stamp on it. And then in terms of those phases and the effort being exerted by each of the different groups here, the county and Deloitte, this looks a little bit like a dance, but it shows a good indication of really who's leading, and that's by the location of these footprints, and then who's accountable to get this work done. So as we start out there in the planning phase, you can see Deloitte in the blue has a really big footprint, and they're leading us through this down through the architect phase. And as we get to configure, the county's starting to catch up. Now we're becoming much more knowledgeable about all the processes and how to actually configure the system. Our teams have been to training, and we're able to really participate at a much better level. You know, we get through testing, up through deployment, and now you can see the county is starting to take over here with the green footprint leading the way, having a bigger impact, and then ultimately getting us to support, where now the county's headed off on their own to maintain the ERP applications. This is a look at the program structure that we put in place for the ERP implementation. And I'll talk through it and highlight some of it because this seemed to work really, really well for us for several reasons. So you can see at the bottom each of the different functional areas, and each of those functional areas have a lead. So the functional areas of finance and budget, focusing on the Workday finance applications and any sort of integrations with Questica. Source to settle, focusing on the Jagger application, and again, any sort of integrations within Workday. Apps and data was largely in charge of the conversion efforts, security integrations, and ultimately became a big player in the reporting space. Our human resources team focusing on all those components of Workday HR that we implemented, and then our facilities asset management group that focus on the Tririga implementation and the integrations with the other applications. And below each of those, of course, are hundreds of subject matter experts and stakeholder groups that help to inform the direction of each of those teams. So within the finance space, they had several groups that they would reach out to keep up to date and ensure that the decisions being made were in line with what the finance operations were looking for in terms of the implementation. Each of the leads of those groups sat on the PMO, the Project Management Office, which then ultimately reported up to the steering committee. And then, of course, we have our change management team, who was available for everybody, understanding that this was a significant change management effort. Included in that group was our communications team and our training team to assist with the overall rollout of the implementation. You'll note that there's a team sponsor for each of the different functional teams, and those folks sat on the executive steering committee, and this worked really well. So when there might be an application and data integration concern or something to discuss, Bob there would be already aware of it and would be able to talk about it within the steering committee, having been a part of the discussions early on. The other thing we tried to do with this program structure was drive decision-making to the lowest level. So if there was a source to settle decision that needed to be made, it could be made within that group. And if it impacted the other groups, we asked that they be informed. But if it wasn't going to fundamentally change anything in any of the other spaces, they were at liberty to move forward with whatever decision-making they needed to. If there were components where some decision needed to be made, we would try to get it resolved within the PMO office, where there was representation from all of the different functional groups. And if we couldn't come to a decision there, it ultimately got escalated to the steering committee, where direction was given on how to move forward. So it might seem odd to show some pictures of the office of where we sit, but this was really impactful to the way that we worked together. So you saw from the last slide, there were dozens of folks, and the majority of them were picked from their job that they already held within the county. And early on, leadership decided that we did not want the team to sit in their current workspace at risk of those folks being pulled back into their old job or being asked to participate in some capacity to some of their previous work. We knew that it was going to require 100% dedication from the individuals that were going to be on this team. And so we put together a space that was designated for the project team. And this really helped as we moved through the journey, and largely because our HR team sat right next to our finance team, who sat right next to our procurement and contracts team. So the ability to collaborate and just go over and talk to one another was really fantastic. And then on top of that, the Deloitte team also sat in this space and basically became embedded within the county. So we were really fortunate to have the opportunity for them to basically just become county employees amongst us and be able to collaborate at a really effective level. And of course, included in here as well were the change communication and training team. So at any point, they could be pulled into a conversation if there was some sort of impact that we wanted to talk about from a change management perspective, or an idea about training, or even a communication that we felt needed to go out. And the last part about this is we were really fortunate for it to be just a few blocks away from what you might consider our county headquarters. So we were able to have lots of meetings with our subject matter experts and stakeholders without it really impacting travel or anything like that. And so just having an actual physical space seemed to really be helpful in this effort. So this is now a look at the timeline for implementation, and I had said remember that March 2017 date from the previous timeline, because that's right where this one picks up. So what you also might recognize too here are the phases that were identified through the Deloitte methodology, with one bonus at the end, which I will get to. But we had our pre-work starting in March of 2017, really just doing some inventory of our current processes, starting to put the plan together, really identifying any other additional team members that were going to be a part of this effort, and then ultimately jumping into the planning phase. So understanding all of the components that we're trying to move forward, in developing the timeline, the individual activities, and then those big high-level milestones that we want to reach for the duration of the project. We moved into that architect phase in July, and this is where we start to design the system and begin some of the effort around conversion and putting all of those ideas and thoughts in place. The prototype phase, where now we've thought about how we want to build it, so now we're actually going in and building, going into the system, taking what we learned through the architect phase and getting it into the systems. Again, then some more focus on data conversion at that point. Pushing us into now February of 2018 is the test phase, and this was all-encompassing of testing. And then concurrently, towards the latter end of this is when we started to really focus on the training aspects. We were able to push out over 100 training opportunities for our staff, and that ranged from very specific functional training for sometimes 5, 6, 10 people to really large roadshows. And this might be for the larger employee population who may just need to know about how to submit an absence or how to update their profile, but not the functional users that were going to be in the system every day. We moved into deployment into November, and then ultimately a go live on January 1 of 2019. And that is where the phases stop from the previous slide, and then we added one just to be cognizant of the decommissioning effort that would happen after go live. So of course we have systems now that are needing to be shut down and archived based on the rules and regulations of our organization, and we just didn't want that component to be missed. So that kind of exists within our timeline for the ERP. And I should note that throughout all of this, we had a communications plan and identified the correct user groups and the messaging to go forward depending on the timing and the phase that we were in. And here's just our happy group going live on January 1st of 2019. For anybody out there who may have participated in an ERP go live, it's kind of technically anticlimactic. We were already in a live system for weeks doing conversion and catch-up transactions, and so we tried to have a little bit of fun with this and have it be more of a implementation, big bang kind of celebration to give the folks who worked so hard on getting us to this point a little bit of a celebration. So this, what did it take really for us to get to that go live point? So if we go back a long ways, 22 months, and this was after the procurement and contracting piece. So this was really from the onset of when Deloitte joined us for that pre-work phase. We had county staff record their hours who participated on this effort, over 160,000 plus work hours. We had about a 60 plus group of county folks who dedicated basically 100% of their time to this effort. And then involvement by over 350 more county staff, and this was subject matter experts, stakeholder groups, individuals who just provided good input on how to move forward. At the height of Deloitte's involvement, they had about 40 people participating, and most of them were on site for the duration of the project, and I'll get to a little bit about that later. We identified 137 business process decisions, and this was a great thing to document as it provides us with a way to go back and look at why we did something. Through our risk log, we had 65 identified risks, and those definitely ranged in impact. One being one of our main sponsors left the county during the project, and for any project manager out there, they know how challenging that can be. And another one being that our labor unions were doing bargaining right during the time of our implementation. So that meant having to reconfigure things as those bargaining pieces were completed. And then getting us to go live, we had 59 integrations. Since then, we have added a few more to take us over that 60 mark. So now a look at what's happening now. We're really in that space of transitioning to ongoing support. This is the kind of tiered support structure that we've put together. Starting down with tier 0, this is really for employees out there to hopefully find what they need with the materials that we've put out, whether that be videos or FAQs, user guides. We have 175 quick reference guides available on our intranet for people to go and find how to maybe do something. If an employee is stuck and they don't know what to do, the next tier up is their key department contacts. So within our HR groups, that means your department HR team to ask, how might I do something, or this doesn't seem to quite work the way I was hoping. For the finance teams, they developed a group called the FinChamps, or the Finance Champions. So a group of kind of super users that are available within each of the departments to go and ask questions. And our Source to Settle team did the same thing with a group called the Mentors, who are really like super users of the system and can answer a lot of those like how do I questions. You see IT there at tier 2. The service desk here for IT is really just for connectivity pieces. Our help desk support is by no means a expert in how to do things in Workday or how to do things in Jagger. So they're really just there to find out if you're connected correctly or if there might be any sort of issue with your password, and ultimately probably triaging to the business team or back down to a department contact, depending on what the question is. So within each of the different central business teams, there's now a support group. So there's a Workday HR support team within our central HR team, the same with finance, and the same within our central sourcing group. So these are the folks who really know the ins and outs of the system, understand the configuration. If a key department contact isn't able to help a user figure out the how do I type questions, it ultimately will get routed up to the central business team to assist and maybe digging into the system a bit to understand, where there might be an issue. And then up at tier 4 is our IT ERP support group. And that is really the folks who assist with the security pieces, any of the integrations that might be breaking or stalled or have an issue. and we have a team within that group that's becoming very proficient in developing reports. And then ultimately, if needed, we reach out to Workday support or Jagger support or IBM support if we are unable to find the solution to whatever the issue might be. Then noted very down at the bottom there, all of these teams are using ServiceNow for ticketing, which is a good way for us to see the number of things that are coming in for the whole ERP landscape. And this was even a change for some of those central business teams, as ServiceNow was largely just used by our IT group, but now they are becoming more proficient in ServiceNow, and we're doing our best to make that utilized to figure out the number of things that are coming at us. This is a program summary from our first 4 months of post-go live, and we're working on putting together numbers for the second 4 months. This is really to show that there are business areas that are moving forward. Things are happening. I mean, you can see that we're paying supplier invoices. In the facility space, we have thousands of requests being submitted and being handled. We have thousands of marketplace purchase orders going through, hundreds of sourcing events. But we still have places to refine. By no means are we at a spot that everything is perfect, and we certainly know that, and we're trying our best to work with our stakeholders and our employees and doing everything we can as we're committed to really making this a great experience for our staff and our employees for the system to do what it is that they're asking it to do. So these were some of the lessons that we learned along the way, really around the implementation piece, and some of it can really move forward on post-implementation. Change management beginning before day one. We often talked about this not being like an IT project. This was not an information technology project of just implementing software. This was a full business transformation effort that basically impacted all of our core operations. So that's a huge change. Looking back at the implementation of SAP, we had been in the same space for almost 20 years, and changing anything after 20 years is going to take a lot of effort. And focusing a lot of attention on that, I think, is important. We had a really high-functioning steering committee, and that was really fortunate. It was the same group of people that participated early on in those analysis discussions. They got to be the same steering committee as we moved through the ERP implementation. So their relationships were established, and they had been working together for almost 4 years before we started moving into the implementation piece, and that was really fantastic. Adding a human element to the story. So we did our best to, early on with the communications, before it was necessary to start talking about the functionality of Workday or any of the other systems, to really just introduce the folks who are a part of this team. So we did some introductions of like the people and who they were, and really just trying to show that we're in this together, we're all working hard, and we really want to make this the best for everybody. In terms of trust your gut, for us, it was really important to speak up. We knew our business the best, and if we felt like something was a little off, it was good to step up and talk about it, talk it through, and find solutions. And we are trying to continue to do that today. I talked about the program principles. Those were really nice to have in the back pocket. So when we had an issue or something that needed discussion, let's see how this matches up against our program principles and determine the best steps forward. Having the right people, both internal and external, was absolutely necessary. At the onset of our implementation project, we told the department that we were going to need the best, and thankfully they gave us their best. And that was essential for us to move forward the way that we did. And that went with the consultants as well. We asked for the best, and we felt like we got a really great group from them. I already talked about the system integrators being on site. They became basically our coworkers, and some of them were here for almost 2 years, and it was a really great partnership to see. As noted earlier, there were several people involved in this project, and there's some overlap here and there, and clearly identifying the roles and responsibilities and who's doing what was really essential to us moving forward. And checking in on that throughout the project also was a really good practice. And finally, celebrating accomplishments. This is really hard work. People spend a lot of hours, a lot of weekends, a lot of holidays, and our leadership was really great at celebrating the efforts of this team and making sure they felt appreciated along the way. And with that, I believe I am all done, and we're ready for a live Q&A.
Great, thanks, Jacob. We have a few questions rolling in, and I'd encourage everyone to go ahead and submit your questions here. We have time for a couple for sure before we are wrapping up today. The first question, does Workday work with other county systems?
I assume that's for me, Justin, or is
Absolutely.
that for Jacob?
For
yes,
either.
Absolutely. And I think as you saw in Jacob's presentation, they had several other systems involved in their full ERP implementation, and Workday provides a whole set of integration tools and capabilities to integrate in or out of the Workday solution, so bidirectional integration. And we do work, depending upon the Workday solution you're dealing with, we work with quite a bit other government solutions.
Absolutely.
Jacob, do you want to comment on that?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, yes, as Sherry noted, Workday comes with an integration platform, which we were able to utilize to integrate with several of our existing applications. And then, as noted too, some of our external vendors and groups that we work with, including benefits providers and things like that.
Terrific. Another question that has kind of come up in a couple different formats is to talk a little bit more about the RFP process itself, and just wondering if you could talk just for a second about that process, and I've got a couple questions about whether you're willing to share the actual RFP, Jacob.
Yes, I believe we have shared that with other groups, and I think that is largely just a request to our central contracting group, and they can provide that. I believe you can find their information on our website. It's multco.us. And in terms of the process, one of the things that I had forgotten to say is we were able to keep Gartner with us as we developed kind of the strategy. Because we are a local, government organization, we couldn't have Gartner lead us through the process, but they helped us do some framing, which was really fantastic. Again, because they had all of that background knowledge of the analysis effort that we had done.
Got it. We've had a couple questions, and I guess this is for probably both Sherry and Jacob. It's a couple questions about cost. We talked a little bit about what was budgeted, and then what the sort of ballpark numbers on what the project cost overall.
Sure. So the budget. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sherry.
No, that's all right, Jacob. Go ahead and answer.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, for our project, keeping in mind that this was, licensing for Workday, licensing for IBM Tririga, licensing for Jagger, integration pieces, and Deloitte's services, our overall project budget was $42.8 million, and that was really over 3 years.
And if I could add, I think to Jacob's point, there are a lot of components in an overall project budget, and depending upon the scope of that project, which in Jacob's case included just about everything Workday offers, as well as several other solutions, the systems implementer. But maybe I'll talk a little bit about our pricing model. And so I think what a lot of our customers will find is the subscription for the solutions is highly predictable over a long period of time. So first of all, you're dealing with predictability of costs way beyond the cost of the implementation itself. And our pricing model generally is based upon the number of employees of an organization. So it's scaled to whether you're a smaller organization or maybe a larger organization like Multnomah. And within our systems implementer community, Workday only allows systems implementers that hold current certifications in the Workday solutions, but we have a wide range of those systems implementers. In the case of Multnomah, they used one of the large-scale implementers, but we also have several implementers that work with more small to medium-sized organizations. So I think, it's always hard to answer the cost question without dealing with the specifics of a particular organization, but we'd be happy to maybe follow up with anyone who wants to have a further conversation about that.
Terrific. Thanks, Sherry. Time for maybe one or two other quick questions. Question for Jacob and maybe for Sherry as well, and that is, how can you access data from your old legacy system?
One of the decisions we made early on is really what to convert. That was part of our large data conversion effort, and what were the pieces that needed to be brought over for compliance reasons into Workday, and then what could we archive out. In this case, we have SAP still available to us. It's for a very limited set of users. So at the moment, we can still access data from SAP, and part of that is important because we did a mid-fiscal year cutover. So as we were going right now through our fiscal year end and closing up those books, we needed to have access into SAP to finalize those steps. And then ultimately, we're identifying the correct archive solution for the data, and it'll all be dependent on, again, those compliance rules, who needs access, what type of access. Sherry, I don't know if you have more to add there.
I would add that we see that strategy very often, which is really archive as much of the old data that you can, and it doesn't mean that it isn't available still for reporting purposes or if you need to go back and check on the old data. But it is one of the first decisions, as Jacob described, is determining early in your project how much data conversion you need to make into the new system. Some of it certainly should be based upon the timing of the project. Obviously, going live on a calendar year basis for something like payroll tends to be what we see most often. On fiscal year basis for finance. And then I think the other thing I would add, maybe Jacob would second, is making sure that your data that you do choose to convert in the system is clean data. I know we had one government customer that intended to bring like 160,000 employee records into the new system, and they spent several months cleaning up the old data in the old system. And then when they did that data conversion of all those employee records, they only had something like 22 errors. So thinking about that question really thoughtfully and not just saying, oh, we need to bring over all the history. You really don't. It's probably to your advantage if you don't. So that's generally what we would recommend.
Terrific. Well, thanks everyone for all your questions. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to leave it there in the interest of being respectful to our time commitment. So in closing, I want to thank Jacob Farkas and Sherry Amos again for sharing their insights on today's webcast. And I'd also, of course, like to thank Workday for making it possible to have this important webcast discussion today. Thanks again to our audience for spending the hour with us. We look forward to seeing you again soon at another governing event. So have a great rest of your day. Thanks much.